In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Do you want the whole truth?
I don't think you're ready.
Governments don't control things. A government can't control the economy without controlling people.
It's Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth.
Welcome back. Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth, proudly on AFR Talk. Well, it is Monday, but we never have a case of them, especially in the 7 o'clock hour Eastern. That would be 6 o'clock Central, and don't even, well, Mountain. Okay, I can't do it. 4 to Pacific. Okay. How are y'all? I hope you're doing well. I hope you had a good weekend. I hope you enjoyed the last hour. And if you missed it, afa.net. Always go there first. And then afa.net/nothingbut-truth. You can go to nothingbut-truth.com. You can also go to the Facebook page, like the page, and just hang out. Put some stuff up on the comments of the show. Comment on live show. It could be something in the past we just talked about or something we're going to talk about right now, like Egypt, aid, and the move to defund Egypt post what is now being termed a coup by the White House. We have our good friend, David Gartenstein-Ross, who is a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. He's a new daddy and an overall great guy. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing well, Crane. It's always great to join you.
Let's get right to it. I have Rand Paul talking to John Roberts, Fox News this weekend, asked about aid to Egypt and saying, hey, you know what? It doesn't serve our purpose. Roll it.
The law is what the law is, and the president is currently in defiance of the law. The law is very explicit. When there is a military takeover, our aid must end. Not that it might end or that he can sit around for months deciding whether he's going to end it.
But there are ways to avoid that. There are ways to avoid that, which the president is pursuing now. The question is, would ending military aid to Egypt be a prudent thing to do?
Yes, because the thing is I don't think we're buying any love of the Egyptian people. When they see an American tank on the street, when someone is shot down or rolled over by a tank that was purchased with American money, do you think that buys any friendship with the Egyptian people?
Let's address first the legal aspects of this, now calling it a coup. Has the president been violating law by continuing to fund Egypt? He did it under Morsi. And there were restrictions put on by Congress before. He just kept going. Now he has been doing it to the military after what has been designated as a coup by many. David?
Yeah, I think that he is violating the law. This is one of those areas of law where there's not really a way to enforce presidential violations. Another one is the War Powers Act, where the president is supposed to consult with Congress after initiating hostilities abroad. In Libya, that didn't happen, but that's not unique to Obama. Basically, going back to the time the War Powers Act was initiated, every president, when given the option, has violated the War Powers Act. So it's quite problematic in terms of giving no effect whatsoever to the law as written. Quite clearly, what occurred in Egypt is a coup. But I also think that almost any president would probably do the same, given the utter dysfunction of Congress.
When we look at funding for Egypt today, I happen to be on board with continuing to fund Egypt because we had 30 million people show up and say, hey, you weren't following the rules, Mr. Morsi, President Morsi, Muslim Brotherhood. And the military stepped in. They stepped into a place where they were met with the Muslim Brotherhood putting children in harm's way, setting up what has been described by some journalists as terror camps within their protest. And now the idea is, well, the military went overboard. Tell me, first off, you can feel free to correct my understanding of that. I may agree or disagree. Also, tell me, why wouldn't we support the military now, considering they really do represent the will of the people and they're moving toward a democratic process?
Well, there are several things here. The first is the definition of a coup in the first instance. The fact is that the military ended up seizing power. This isn't a traditional coup where the military seizes power and it's not supported by the population at all. The best term I saw for it was a civil society coup, where civil society is up in arms, people go out to the streets, and the military claims to represent their will. But I think a coup is a coup, and this was a coup. The second thing is continuing aid thereafter. I don't think that the military's subsequent actions should cause us to redefine the event. I think that actually is even less principled. Some people have argued that now, after not calling it a coup, we should call it a coup because of what the military did last Wednesday. But that's ridiculous logic. And the reason why is because we look at what they did on Wednesday and then say, oh, well, we just realized based on that what you did is actually a coup. It doesn't work that way. I mean, if you didn't think it was a coup in the first instance, or you refused to call it that, what the military does afterward shouldn't suddenly change the way you define an event. But that being said, cutting off aid to the military is something that's independent of whether or not we think it's a coup. The final thing is you're talking about shouldn't we support the military now since they represent the people? I think that what the military did on Wednesday, to call it problematic would be the understatement of the decade. They killed between 600 and 1,000 people. This is a massive slaughter. The Brotherhood does not have clean hands in any way, shape, or form. But this was excessive beyond all proportionality. The majority of people being killed, the vast majority, were not armed. The vast majority were unarmed protesters. The military had a lot of different options. And for me, from a perspective of U.S. interests, it's problematic to be linked to a regime and to be funding their military while it's engaged in this kind of crackdown against the people. I think morally it's problematic, and I think it's also problematic from a perspective of U.S. interests. What I advocate is we should condition aid, and this is rapidly becoming an obsolete suggestion. What I advocated last week in National Review is conditioning aid upon a few stringent conditions, issuing a public apology for what they did, court-martialing the officers who were responsible for that crackdown, which killed so many people, and finally, ensuring that this kind of event doesn't occur in the future absent exigent circumstances. Obviously, in a situation like this, people will be killed as the military tries to prevent a civil war, but you can't have mass killings, of which you now have had 3, one of which was one of the most horrendous mass killings a government has initiated since Tiananmen Square.
If you could, and just to say on that last point you made with the killing that was so horrendous, tell me what was the context of the use of force? And Brent, just so you know, I want to float the break till I call for it, if that's all right. What is the show of the use of force? What was the context of what the military was dealing with on the reporting that you have, David?
On the reporting that I have, in the outset, there were people firing at the military. They were firing essentially with small arms. Shotguns, pistols. There were a lot of rocks being thrown. Over 40 members of the security forces died. So, as I said, the protesters don't have unclean hands. From the reporting that I'm hearing, and I haven't had a chance to verify, but this has come from very credible sources. Essentially, the military was able to clear out the people who were attacking them with small arms right away. And then tanks rolled in afterwards. So basically, after they had already eliminated the danger, then they went in with tanks and started firing on the crowd. So a distinct sequence in which they first took care of attackers and then basically rolled through protesters who didn't pose a significant threat to them.
Okay, and number one, just so the audience knows, when David says he has a source, I don't question it. It's just something I've known about David for years and working with him. That's solid. The question I do have is that what has taken place is the military's reaction to this. You say, hey, it's an overreaction, and this exceeded what was proportional. I think there are arguments always to say that they are removing a threat or continuing threat, and the small arms fire, yes, it was removed, but what's coming next? Do they have absolute knowledge of that? And a way to go. I'm not saying it's a pleasant debate to have, and it's not really a pleasant discussion to have because, as you said, there's blood on the hands of all. Well, what I'm seeing is, and here's where my focus goes. My focus goes, military, not a really big fan of them. Muslim Brotherhood, wish they were gone. Want them done. Because I see the Muslim Brotherhood terrorizing, killing Christians specifically. Their behavior their outline of what they want to do. They're not interested in a democracy with individual protections. They're interested in tyranny, Islamic State. So I'm looking at this and saying, get rid of the problem. They had their chance. Where would you suggest I'm going wrong there?
Okay. So the first thing I would suggest is, with respect to the crackdown, I don't think that what's coming next, that question is really as much of a question as you make it out to be. If you're not being fired upon, bringing in tanks and firing on a crowd is just not something a professional military does in a situation where it's trying to control a crowd and trying not to inflame passions in a country where tensions are running high. That's the first thing. The second thing is that they had other options to clear out these squares. I know for a fact that one option that had been floated to them by outside parties was starve out the protesters, meaning it's Egypt, it's really hot. Like, eventually those crowds are going to get tired of being there. They're not going to camp out forever. One reason Occupy Wall Street didn't last that long is because when winter came around in New York City, suddenly being out there in these tent cities just wasn't that cool. Likewise, the elements would take care of these sit-ins. Eventually people would disperse. And that would be able to diffuse the situation without having the massive bloodshed that they did. The third thing is that when you get to military versus the Muslim Brotherhood, I agree. I am no fan of the Muslim Brotherhood. I much prefer looking at them as kind of people in power. I'm more comfortable with the military being in power than the Brotherhood. That being said, we have to look at the way in which our allies are conducting themselves. If the military is killing hundreds of people, up to 1,000 people, most of whom are unarmed, that's not the kind of thing that's going to quell a situation. That's the kind of thing that could further radicalize the Brotherhood, which has not been engaged in a war against the state and now could become embroiled in one. And secondly, it makes the U.S. look very bad. Like, while we are linked to the Egyptian regime from a perspective of al-Qaeda-like groups and other Islamic terrorists, there's a greater chance that they're going to target us as a result of what the Egyptian military is doing while we are funding the Egyptian military. So when I look at it from a perspective of U.S. interests, I see their actions as highly problematic, even though I share your very deep concerns about the Brotherhood.
And I think that we're definitely on the same page in the sense of the Brotherhood, and never would question that, because I know sometimes that happens in the discussion/debates that we try to put that on and say, well, you're really not because you don't want this. I understand where you're coming from. My final question on this issue, David, would be, and then we're going to take a short time out and then come back with the NSA and your thoughts on that, being a lawyer, also Foundation for Defense of Democracy's expert in radicalization. The question I have is, in those camps, the massacre that you're referring to and the hundreds of people that were unarmed, there were reports in those camps that they were imposing the Hammurabi Code on those that did not. I mean, you had people really being held prisoner in those places. And I'm just asking, is there any information regarding that? Because if their idea is to say, hey, we could starve them out, but then people are women and children, men are being tortured and hurt, or we can go in there and mow them down, we can take that kind of action. Do you follow me where I'm going with this? Of that decision?
I don't know one way or another whether that was occurring in the sit-ins.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've seen reports. I don't have verification one way or the other.
Gotcha. All right, David. Flip side, NSA. Should we continue it? Rand Paul says no. Others have said pretty much the same thing, and they are gaining in their popularity big time, especially within the Republican Party. Crane Durham returns with our good friend David Gartenstein-Ross, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracy's AFR Talk.